Hello and welcome back. All right, let's go ahead and get started on editing our photo of Echo. So we have a lot of different options for editing our photos, and this is the very first step that I do before I touch any of the panels, and that is to turn on my histogram by coming inside of here and selecting Show Histogram, or using the keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and the number 0. And the reason why I start off with the histogram is because it's telling me what I need to fix with my image. So let's take a quick look at this image in the histogram. So we can see there's a lot of peaks and valleys in different colors, which represent the 3 different color channels, which are red, green, and blue. But we can also see that the peaks and valleys go from the far left to the far right. In this image here, we can see a huge gap, and this means I didn't capture all the detail in this image and it's too dark. So when you have a large gap on the right side, your image is underexposed, and it's telling you that you need to fix the exposure of your image by making it brighter. If I go in here and move this to the right, we then see that the valleys and peaks move to the right, and then we have a gap on the left side. Now my image is overexposed. So I like to have my histogram on as I'm editing to make sure that I'm not over editing. And what I want to do is I want to move that histogram to the right to start to fill in the details in the highlights. So here's the finished edit, and we can see that the histogram fills up the area much more than before. It's not all the way to the right, which is fine, because if I go too far, I will start to clip detail in the image. And I'm going to show you a little trick once we get to our exposure on how to make sure that you're not over editing and clipping any data. And this technique is hidden. You can't really see it. So I'm going to share with you how to use this specific tool so that you don't over edit your images. So real quick, let's go over the histogram just a little bit more. And I want to explain the different peaks and valleys as well. So on the right side, we have our highlights and our white points. On the left side, we have our shadows and our black points. In the middle is all the detail and all the information in the mid-tones of our image. Now, if you come down here to the light panel, what do we have? We have highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So the white points and the black points are the outer edges of the histogram, and that's where you begin to clip your data if you go too far to the right or too far to the left. You can also have peaks that go too high, and you will then begin clipping that data as well. So if I move this to the far right, we can see that this particular peak, the green channel, is being clipped. So the colors and the detail and the highlights in that color range are being clipped from the image, and I over edited the image because now it's overexposed. So this is why we want the histogram on, so we can make sure that we do not over edit our images by clipping detail in the highlights and the shadows. Now, just below the histogram, we have some auto options to help us get started on our edits. If you're brand new to editing and you've never edited before, you may be tempted to click the auto button, which will automatically edit your image, and it does a fairly decent job, at least for this image. And we can now see that the histogram is now filled in some of the areas over here on the right, and we have more detail from the left to the right. So this may be a good starting point for you if you're brand new to editing, but I wouldn't rely on it for every photo because it's not going to work perfectly on every image. In fact, I'm really not liking the settings selected by the auto option because it's reduced the contrast. I prefer a more contrasty type image. At least that's my personal preference and my style. The other thing is we don't have enough shadow detail in this area here. So I can either go back and fine tune the edit for that particular area of the image, which I think looks much better now than what Lightroom gave me originally. So you still may need to come in and tweak the settings for best results. Now I'm just going to quickly go through these and reset them. Simply by hovering over each name of the slider, we will get a reset button to reset everything. And then of course we have an option up here to convert our image to black and white. And then below that we have profiles. So a profile will allow you to control how the colors and the tonality or the contrast of your image is rendered based on the profile that you select. So you have to think of profiles as a starting point for your editing of your images. In fact, this is another type of edit that you can do in camera, especially if you have a DSLR type camera, because within your camera you should have options to choose different types of profiles based on what that manufacturer is giving you. So Nikon, Canon, Panasonic, Sony, and others are going to provide you with camera specific profiles based on your particular camera, and they're all going to be slightly different from each other based on the algorithms that they're using. And if that wasn't enough, Adobe also includes additional profiles from which you can choose from. And again, these are not going to be exactly the same as the ones you get from your camera directly. So personally, I would recommend capturing your profile of choice in camera and not during the editing process. So let's take a closer look at some of these profiles to get a better understanding of what it's going to look like. So right here, I can click on this and then I get a drop-down menu. And from here, I can select all profiles. So at the top here, we have Adobe Raw Profiles. So if we hover over them, we will then see our image over here update based on that particular profile. So this particular profile, the neutral one, is very flat compared to, let's say, Vivid, which is much brighter and has more contrast versus neutral. And then Portrait and Standard are going to give you a different starting point based on which one you select. And again, the contrast levels and the colors are going to be different from one color profile to another. So I would recommend choosing in camera, of course, but if you're going to do it at this point, I would select the profile based on what I'm shooting. So in this case, I'm shooting a portrait of my little guy here, Echo. So I would probably pick Portrait in Lightroom CC or in camera because my camera also has a portrait option as well. And I would rather choose my portrait option from my camera manufacturer because it's going to better reflect what was captured at the time I took the photo. And we can see that compared to Adobe, this is much brighter and much more vivid than the Adobe profile. So if I decide that this is too much and has too much contrast, I may end up going with neutral, which is flatter, but not as flat as the Adobe Raw option. Now, in addition to the camera and the Adobe profile options, we also have some additional options to use that are more creative versus the other two options. So we have some artistic, some modern, and some vintage profiles that we can use as a starting point based on our creative vision. The other thing that you need to know is you can choose or change your profile later on if needed, and it's not going to affect any of the sliders that you apply during the editing process. So I can increase my exposure and then I can change my camera profile to something else, but the exposure setting that I set here doesn't change. So once you have all of this done in your first step, you are then ready to begin editing your image by adjusting all the options in the light panel, which we're going to do in the next lesson. So if you're ready for that, let's do it.